All right, thank you. Okay, sorry, I'm old. I have to wear my glasses. Weird to read sometimes. All right. So our presentation is it's a time for an EAD glow up, how to make finding aids more attractive to users. My name is Becky Skeen. I'm the Special Collections Cataloging Librarian at Utah State University, and I am presenting with some of my colleagues here. Paul Daybell, Archival Librarian, Cataloging Librarian, sorry. Andrea Payans, Metadata Librarian, Heather Housley, Special Projects Technician. Liz Wolcott is our Associate Dean for Collections, and Kelly Roveno, I may have slaughtered that, is our University Archivist. And so we're here to talk about some research that we did on EAD finding aids. Oh, I should advance these, shouldn't I? Yeah. Oh, that was just a blank one. Here's our people. Well, all right. We also wanted to take a moment to thank some other people from Special Collections and Cataloging that have helped us with this research project. They were vital to be able to code everything and get all of our analysis done. So we just wanted to take a moment to thank all of them. All right, so we're going to be talking about the background for the research project, the methodologies used, results and analysis, discussion and takeaways, and future research. I'm going to cover background. So Utah State University's Cataloging and Metadata Services Unit strives to regularly evaluate its own practices and workflows to identify areas of possible improvement. It was during such a discussion that it was decided that we wanted to conduct an in-depth project on user search behaviors with relationship to areas of cataloging, including creation of traditional MARC records, EAD finding aids, and Dublin Core metadata. Starting in fall of 2019, we began our multi-year research project into search behaviors for metadata standards employed by the unit, with phase 1 looking at creation of MARC records, phase 2 EAD finding aids, and 3 Dublin Core metadata. This presentation obviously focuses on phase 2, which is looking at user search behaviors in relation to EAD finding aids. Currently, EAD finding aids are created and let's see, currently, EAD finding aid creation and remediation of legacy guides, takes place in both the Special Collections and Archives and Cataloging Metadata units of the library at Utah State University, depending on the archival material category or the type of work required. Finding aids created by the CMS unit are first generated in XML with the description element populated from an Excel spreadsheet using a mail merge process. Once this finding aid is created, it is loaded into 2 separate locations: archive space, which can only be viewed by the library staff currently, and Archives West, a consortium to which Utah State University Libraries contributes the finding aids for public discovery. The project consisted of looking at 5 different collections and following these basic steps. The team created 2 identical versions of the same EAD finding aid, with only the variation being in the inventory description. One version described to the item level and the other in the box or folder level. Both versions of the EAD finding aid were posted online and at the same time and left untouched for a minimum of 1 year. After that time, the web analytics for each finding aid were pulled and analyzed for usage patterns. We felt that this method of measuring the 2 descriptive levels side by side would provide the most concrete evidence of whether the descriptive level impacted discoverability.
All right, I'm going to be talking about the methodology section. All right, so with complexities regarding the processing times and impacts on discoverability in mind, the research team brainstormed ways to empirically assess what impact the level of description had on discoverability. In doing so, the team settled on creating 2 identical versions of the same EAD finding aid, with the only variation being the inventory description. One version would be described at the item level, the other at the box or folder level, and then left for 1 year. So here's an example of the box level description for the USU football program's finding aid. So the extent of the metadata consisted of just the main title and the date. And then here is an example of the USU football programs described at the item level. So here we included mostly descriptions of the opponents and also the team rosters. All right, and then the collections chosen for this project came from the University Archives and the 5 Folklore Archives. These are 2 distinct sub-archives within the Special Collections and Archives unit. Curators in these units were asked to select 2 to 3 collections for description, with the caveat that the collection could have no existing online presence in order to not skew any results. And then once the finding aids for each collection were ready, they were posted at the same time in the Archives West portal. The research team designated one person to review the online finding aids for issues or problems on the day it was posted. And after this point, no research team members were permitted to search for or pull the finding aids. The goal was to see how much traffic each finding aid was able to attract naturally. However, the other library and archival staff were not restricted from accessing the finding aids because they regularly assist patrons with searching the collections. So apart from the research team and curators, no other person was even informed of which collections were chosen for this project. All right, so each collection had a different start date being posted online because the research team had to develop descriptive inventory for each collection from scratch. Once the last collection was posted online, the research team let the collection sit for 1 year. In 2021, the research team downloaded the traffic data for each version of each collection using Google Analytics, starting with the day after the finding aid was posted online. The collections were online anywhere between 13 and 18 months. So along with total page views, the research team downloaded the URLs access each day for each collection from Google Analytics. So a typical URL includes the ARC assigned to the finding aid, and if present, information about the search parameters chosen by the users, including search terms and filters. When the URL is simply the ARC for the finding aid, it often indicates that it was found through a browser search. In this case, search terms used by the user are unknown. When the URL included search terms or system filters, such as the unique repository symbol, it often, though not always, indicated that the user searched within the Archives West system or came through a filtered search from the USU Library's homepage. So once these URLs were downloaded, they were loaded into an Airtable base. The URLs were then coded for the type of URL, whether it was static or with search terms, and whether the USU repository was selected. Search terms were then extracted from the URLs wherever present and coded for where they were found in the EAD finding aid and the type of search terms used. So this process was then repeated a second time by a different coder to ensure that we had intercoder reliability. So here's an example of a search term for basketball and how the coding team would work through the finding aid to determine where in the finding aid these search terms were present. Okay, now Andrea is going to go over our results and analysis.
Okay. All right. So our URL coding data, it was used to answer a few research questions. First was what type of search terms are most commonly used by patrons and where are they found in the finding aid? This chart breaks down how often search query types appeared in URLs. The search terms used by patrons were primarily personal names. Last names appeared in 77% of URLs, and first names appeared in 57%. And the next highest category, the subject terms, were used in 14%. And the rest of the query types were found significantly less often. Okay. The three major sections of a finding aid, of those three, the collection inventory section was by far the most pivotal section for matching user search terms, connecting with 95% of the URLs that included search terms. The front matter was the very distant second, with only 20% of the controlled access section only connecting with 3%. This table shows the labeled headings of the finding aids split among the three major sections of the guides. The headings are shown along with their associated tags, and you can see which specific tags contained search terms. And again, they were overwhelmingly found in the collection inventory section. Let's see, our second research question is there a measurable difference in discoverability and user interactions between finding aids described to the item level and finding aids described to the box or folder level? Analytics gathered for page views showed that finding aids were accessed a total of 1,183 times during the 13 to 18 months that they were posted online.
The most frequently accessed collections were the football programs and the men's basketball programs. This table demonstrates that overall 98% of all page views occurred with item level finding aids as compared to their file or box level counterparts, which showed that more detailed collection inventory sections resulted in greater discoverability. The research team looked at the number of days that the finding aid was accessed over the course of its time posted online. The item level finding aids for the football programs and the men's basketball programs collections were accessed the most frequently, and the football programs accessed the least, once per day on 72% of the days it was posted online. And the basketball programs accessed at least once per day on 42% of the days that it was available online. On the other hand, so access for the file level descriptions for both collections never broke 2% of the days that they were posted online. Taking the name heavy sports programs collections out of the mix, the remaining collections accessed still showed a preference for the item level description. The item level finding aids for the College Journal and Barnes survey were both accessed around 3% of the days that they were posted online, with the file level finding aids accessed less than 1% of the days online. On average, users spent more time on pages with item level description than file level description. And in a shift from the previous metrics, the College Journal and Bear River Heritage Barnes survey saw the most time on page engagement, with the item level finding aids seeing between 3 and 4 minutes on average. Interestingly, football programs saw almost the same level of time engagement on file level and item level finding aids. Our third research question was how do search parameters impact discoverability for file level versus item level description? Page view data showed that regardless of whether search terms were present in the URL, the item level finding aids were more likely to be viewed across the board. Illustrating this point, you can see that neither the College Journal Index nor the football program collections would have been accessed at all without the item level description, indicating that browsers were not matching the file level finding aids with user search terms. Some search query types correspond with terms that occur in multiple sections in a finding aid, and these sections are primarily located in the front matter portion of the finding aid, which are identical between both the item and file level finding aids. So it is unsurprising that the number of times that search terms triggered views were relatively similar in the file and item level description finding aids with regards to that front matter section. And as shown earlier, you can see the collection level inventory or the DSC portion of the finding aid were far more likely to be accessed at the file, far more than the file level description. Okay, Liz is going to now talk about our discussion and takeaways.
Okay. So lots and lots of numbers. Okay. So let's do this here. Okay. So your main takeaways for this are number one, that names are really important. This is what people are looking for in a lot of these collections. Number two is that page views are often driven by the unique content in the collection inventory. And number three, that the lack of a robust inventory actually means that some of our collections are invisible to users. So what we found overall is just that search terms are predominantly personal names about 78% of the time. The subject terms, which is the next largest category, only accounted for 14% of the search parameters. And this is just the terms that they chose to use. Unsurprisingly, the search terms were also overwhelmingly found in the collection inventory, with 95% of the search terms found in those sections. And for 76% of the time where we knew what the search terms were, the scope and content and unit title tags in the collection inventory were the only tags in which the search terms were exclusively or only found. So whenever it was an exclusive space, those were the two tags that were found in. Meaning that if those had not been present, it would not have been visible to the user. So these findings suggest that the content found in the collection inventory was often unique within the finding aid, and that it better matched search terms than the front matter did. Okay, and in the previous question, we were limited to only those URLs that had search terms, which are just a small, it's 140 of the 146 URLs, but accounted only for like 13% of the page views, right? So when we examine the findings for the question, is there a measurable difference in discoverability between finding aids described to the item and finding aids described to the box or folder level, we looked at all of the URLs and we found that the finding aids with the more robust collection inventory descriptions were by far the more discoverable to patron. So some of the quick things to note is that item level descriptions were on average 6,100% more discoverable, average across the whole thing. The range actually went from 360 to 10,000% difference, depending on the collection you were in. So just over 98% of all page views occurred in item level finding aids, leaving less than 2% for the file level guides. And item level finding aids were also on average accessed 3,750% more days. And users also spent 420% more time on the finding aids with item level descriptions. So these findings suggest that the extent to which the materials described also not only significantly impacts discoverability, but also engagement. There we go. And finally, for that last research question, the takeaways were, oh, and just a reminder, the last one was how do search parameters impact discoverability? What we found is that when we broke it down to the database searches, so when they're searching inside the database, that the item level description was the single biggest driver of page views, averaging 1,020% more visibility for patrons. When it came from browser traffic, though, it's even more significant. For all page views driven by browser traffic, item level finding aids averaged 20,420% more visibility to patrons. And the biggest takeaway is that 2 of the collections in this research project, including our most used collection, so that was the USU football programs, actually would have had 0. Would have had no browser traffic at all if it had not had the item level description in it. So to this day, it's still our most viewed collection. So without that, it would have been at the very bottom. So front matter and both types of finding aids showed relatively the same frequency of access. The item level finding aids though showed a substantial increase in collection inventory section with 90% of URLs matching the item level finding aids and only 5% matching the file level. Okay, I'm going to let Kelly tell you what we're going to do with this.
I'm going to talk about where we go with all these numbers. So there's some main takeaways from item level description. One is that names are popular and to use those when possible. For USU, we do a lot of genealogy, for example, with yearbooks, catalogs. We have certain scholarships that depend on parents or grandparents going to USU, and sometimes the registrar's office can't determine that. So those are collections that could also be targeted. Sports are a big one. Football programs are popular, and we'll get to some of the women's sports we've been doing. But anywhere names that might be useful for patrons are ones I look into. That moves into how to identify collections. Obviously, item level description takes a lot of work, especially if transcribing names by hand. Some of these are not digitized. So thinking about which ones would have the biggest impact either for users or for internal use. We do have some material digitized, our yearbooks, our catalogs, some of our newspapers. So investigating ways if we can harvest that metadata and put it into finding aids. Obviously, some of that is more challenging than others. I don't know if we can put item level description for newspapers page by page, maybe in the future. But also then kind of thinking about conducting further research. We've identified some collections based on reference requests that we've put item level description in and names and kind of see where that goes. And then looking forward in university archives. So Heather will talk about some of the metadata practice we looked at.
So we were already in the process of improving description standards for the university archives. So this study fits well with what we were already doing and helps us justify the time and resources we were spending. Our metadata practices include improving box titles. You can see what the original title transcribed was and what we've come up with as a final box title. Removing miscellaneous wherever possible. There is one collection in the Utah Agricultural Experiment Station that is actually called miscellaneous publications. So we did have to keep that one, but in every other instance, we've tried to use something other than miscellaneous. And then when items or files are individually barcoded, we create item titles with greater detail, as you can see here. And above all, we make sure that the collection title includes names if appropriate and no swear words, even if they felt appropriate at the time to whoever accepted the materials. And now that we've used this label 3 times in our presentations over the last couple of days, it's probably time to retire it. Never. Further, we are adjusting the record group schema to align better with our collecting priorities. So we're not actively deaccessioning any collections that have already been processed, but we are being more selective in what we accept. And so probably no more Tupperware convention materials, although they do add a lot of color. And finally, we are identifying access restrictions with greater granularity, so that the user knows that these collections aren't necessarily denied access, but that there might be an extra step in gaining access to that information.
So one of the, I don't know if it would be an improvement. We're doing a lot of extra work to add item level description where I feel appropriate. So that kind of extends the workflow and doesn't make it more efficient. But one way we are trying to kind of integrate this into our work is providing names and then linking to digital items that we already have. We've run into a few issues. Digital linking for USU, we have done one collection and we're trying to do, I've worked with Dr. Proctor at USU to look into kind of women's sports history. So this is from her class last year. They interviewed some of the volleyball players that won the national title in 1978. We have an exhibit, you can Google it, some fascinating history, but when people search for these and are finding aids, we'd like them to be able to find the digital items quickly. Getting that to actually work is turning out to be, let's say an opportunity to learn how to integrate our systems more efficiently. So I guess come back next year. We'll have it figured out, I'm sure. So one of the kind of points of this research is trying to identify which collections could benefit from this item level description. One of those ways is kind of to track and analyze reference requests that I get to support genealogy, scholarship, and university advancement. And also kind of answering if that actually does help researchers. If you want to look, there's an interview linked in the notes of this slide. Tammy Proctor did basketball, the history of women's basketball at USU this year. And the students did a really interesting UPR interview, and they said lots of nice things about us we didn't pay them, I promise. But the students come in and do research in the archives with Dr. Proctor. They really enjoy that, but usually I have to kind of facilitate like, oh, you're looking for this. Well, it's buried in the provost's records. So seeing if we, putting in names of athletes, of coaches can help kind of help them facilitate their research. So hopefully we can get some numbers on that soon. And then hold on. Again, looking at how these access stack correlate to patron interests. We have a lot of interest in the football program online, but not necessarily in reference requests. If people are just looking at family members or themselves, or if that could also possibly mean this could be subject of digitization. So using this data for more than just finding aids could be one area we can expand into, and then kind of harvesting metadata from that digitization that we already have or might do in the future to do kind of this item level description. And here are resources. My colleagues wrote a great article that is linked in the slides. You should go read it. And then we have some procedures that you also can reference.
Oh, someone left their phone up here. Don't retire that label at all. I feel like that's an artifact in itself, right? It represents a time and space and person. So, all right, let's go ahead and open up for questions. What? Oh. All right, let me check the Q&A. Nothing here yet, so everything's wide open.
Thanks. This is for Gordon or Corey. So with the computational analysis, is that similar to digital humanities? Is the purpose for it to be used as digital humanities? What's the
So-
correlation?
Computational analysis is a digital humanities technique, and so it is firmly and squarely embedded in digital humanities is the short answer. Yeah. Since I'm up here, I have a question for my USU colleagues. So we all know, and I think we knew intuitively, so thank you for actually putting numbers to the data, that item level description is better for access. We also know that it takes a whole lot of time to create item level access. And so you've talked a little bit about some things, but I'm curious on deeper thoughts about how do you balance the time and effort required to create item level description with the benefits that access brings.
So I think one is just thinking about the resources you have like realistically available. I did not come into this project until like after the first round of study was done. But we are fortunate enough to have some student who work for us, who did a lot of the transcribing of material. And right now we're targeting our item level description. So it is like hours of work, but it's not like till the end of time. But that is something we've thought about. Obviously, unless you have like a good, you're never going to get item level description for every collection. And so really thinking about what of our core missions, we're a public ag school. So supporting student research is a big part of kind of the drive right now for item level description. And then thinking about also like our more like what we get actually requests on. So supporting either our internal stakeholders, advancement, or community interest in genealogy is kind of what's driving it right now.
And we're just like also experimenting with some methods that could help us. So like their football programs, we actually did some rough scans of just the pages we wanted. And then we ran them through some programs to help extract data from it to make it go faster. So if you have consistent collections, that you can structure the data, right? But if they're handwritten letters and those stuff, then it's a different story. So it just depends on what you have available.
I have a question for Gordon and Corey. Collections as data, as you were saying, is so use specific. So how do you prioritize which collections to kind of prepare as data?
Yeah, doing our literature review, this was actually one of those points that people had different opinions about. Like we saw with the Thomas Padilla, you said, I mean, everything needs to be user-based, but there's no one case where you can put your data in a way where everyone's going to be able to use it, while other people made the opposite point, that you should try to choose projects where the data is going to be reusable and different researchers will be able to use that data in different ways to reach different sorts of conclusions. And we've sort of taken that approach with what we've looked at. I think the examples that we showed are collections that would support a variety of research, whether that's corpus analysis. I mean, a corpus analysis project isn't just about numbers, it's about some sort of research question that somebody's trying to answer using the data. Similarly, the student data or, well, I think the CLEF one is maybe a little more specific, but still hopefully being able to be used in multiple ways. I don't know that there's one good answer in terms of prioritizing these sorts of things. Like we said, we're focusing on a user-based decision-making process, probably the same way that this item level revisions are being done at USU, and not hopefully trying to accommodate individual researchers who are interested in a very particular project. I think we would try to bend a little bit if somebody came to us with a really great project that didn't just meet their needs, but we'd be able to use their requests to be able to move something forward.
Thank you. I'm thinking about how long and how long it would take to clean up OCR metadata, and that could be pushed onto the requester. Any other questions? Where's the mic?
For USU, my question is about, you talked about item level description is probably really good for collections that have a lot of names. Outside of names, how do you have some other guidelines on which collections are have that kind of content that would be valuable to item level describe, or more valuable than other types of collections?
Okay. So speak as a person who doesn't have to do this directly. Anything that would help us, we try to pay attention to anything that like captured USU history or would connect us with the alumni office or the president's office. So we made descriptions that way so that we could connect it up with them. So those were kind of our use cases. Outside of names, it's really kind of hard to predict what people want. So we also take a look at like the larger usage patterns and try to see, it's just stunning how often what people are interested are different than what we're interested in. So we do try to take the institutional perspective, but then also look at the other kind of usage. It's amazing. Our newspapers actually are some of our largest used collections, and those are really hard to figure out exactly what people are looking for. Sometimes they're looking for events and other stuff. So trying to keep on top of that is it's a daily, not daily. We pull stats regularly and do try to look at that to help inform that, but it's all a guessing game.
I'll just add to that too. So the names was really interesting because the names were extremely heavy in the basketball and football programs. But one of the folklore collections that we had was an Adams Elementary Valentine's Day tee that was also very name heavy, but had very little traffic. And so our like unofficial working theory is that like the kids that were in those pictures know they're like in their 30s now and know not to Google themselves. But like grandpa's like, let's see, I played at USU in 1974. So even the names can be kind of touchy. So yeah, it's a lot of just kind of working with your stakeholders and understanding, who's this collection's reaching and how they're accessing it. So.
Well, if that's it, we'll go ahead and break. Before we dismiss for a 15-minute break right before our lunch, we just ask that everyone waits to enter the Redwood room until noon so that Blue Light Media can have the space to make the transition. I want to thank all of our presenters. What a really interesting conversation today. And stick around, ask them more questions, and we'll see you all in a little bit.